I am thankful for the opportunity of presenting the abstract of massive transfusion in trauma. Is it time for a new definition made by the group of trauma and emergency surgery from Fundación Valle de Lili in Cali, Colombia. I am Daniela Urbano, and first of all, I would like to state that we do not have any relevant financial relationship with any commercial interest that pertains to the content of our presentation. The criteria for massive transfusion, which is defined as 10 or more units of packed red blood cells in the first 24 hours, is met in approximately 13 to 24% of trauma patients who receive blood transfusion. This is an arbitrary definition, as there is no actual agreement. Literature has shown that mortality increases with the number of units of packed red blood cells transfused, but has failed to demonstrate a threshold effect at 10 units or any other value. Considering that the development of guidelines is based on the definition of massive transfusion, the definition needs to be representative regarding patients who undergo massive hemorrhage, since ultimately this is the group that benefits from this strategy. This study aims to identify which definition has a better performance regarding mortality and multi-organ failure. We hypothesize that the traditional definition underestimates patients with massive bleeding and that the higher intensity definitions capture better these patients and exclude patients who do not have a major bleeding but slowly reaches the threshold. We performed a retrospective review of civilian trauma cases between 2015 and 2017. Patients who were 18 years and older who had the highest trauma team activations, had torso trauma, and required emergent surgery were included. Those who did not receive at least 1 unit of packed red blood cells in the first 24 hours were excluded. The outcomes were hospital mortality and multi-organ failure, which was defined as a SOFA score of 2 points or higher. We analyzed sensitivity, specificity, positive and negative likelihood ratio for both outcomes. And the following massive transfusion definitions described in the literature were evaluated. 10 units of packed red blood cells in 24 hours, 50 units of total blood products in 24 hours, 6 units of packed red blood cells in 6 hours, 10 units of packed red blood cells in 6 hours, 5 units of packed red blood cells in 4 hours, 4 units of packed red blood cells in 1 hour, the critical administration threshold, which is 3 units of packed red blood cells in 1 hour, and a combination of 10 units of packed red blood cells in 24 hours or 6 units of packed red blood cells in 6 hours. A total of 266 participants received at least 1 unit of packed red blood cells and were included in the analysis. Of them, 86% were male with a median age of 29 years old. The trauma mechanism was penetrating in 84% and 58 patients died, being hemorrhage the first cause of death in 74%, followed by central nervous system trauma in 12%. Regarding mortality, the traditional definition of massive transfusion had a sensitivity of 40% and a specificity of 92%. Now, considering the other definitions, 50 in 24 hours and 10 in 6 hours had the highest specificities, positive likelihood ratio, and ORs, probably only identifying the worst cases, but missing an important share due to having the lowest sensitivities among them all. Regarding 4 in 1 hour had the highest sensitivity of 71% and an acceptable specificity of 68%. Among the most homogeneous definitions, there are 5 in 4 hours with an acceptable sensitivity of 61%, specificity of 81%, and percentage of correct classification of 76%, but a low positive likelihood ratio and OR. The combined definition had a specificity of 80%, which is similar to 5 in 4 hours, but a slightly higher sensitivity, positive likelihood ratio, and OR, with an acceptable percentage of correct classification of 77%. Now, 6 in 6 hours had a sensitivity of 62% and a slightly better specificity, positive likelihood ratio, OR, and percentage of correct classification than the combined definition and 5 in 4 hours. Regarding all of these definitions seem to be more advantageous than the traditional one. Now, regarding multi-organ failure, most definitions have a low performance respecting sensitivity. And if we see the traditional definition of massive transfusion has a really low sensitivity of 18% and a specificity of 98%. Now, other definitions seem to overshadow the traditional one, like 5 in 4 hours, which had a good specificity of 92%, an acceptable sensitivity of 38%, the second best positive likelihood ratio, and OR with a 66% of correct classifications. The combined definition had the same sensitivity and similar specificity and percentage of correct classification as 5 in 4 hours, with an acceptable positive likelihood ratio and OR. Now, 6 in 6 hours had the same specificity of 91% at the combined definition, but lower sensitivity, positive likelihood ratio, OR, and percentage of correct classification. And lastly, 4 in 1, which had a specificity of 78% and the second best sensitivity of 48%. In conclusion, there is no perfect definition for massive transfusion based on our results. Regarding death, most definitions tend to have low sensitivities. Among them, the most acceptable one seems to be 4 in 1 hour, 50 in 24 hours, 10 in 24 hours, and 10 in 6 hours are the ones with the highest specificity, and the most homogeneous ones seems to be 5 in 4 hours, the combined definition, and 6 in 6 hours. Lastly, regarding mortality, most definitions tend to have a low sensitivity and high specificities. At the end, what this work leaves us is the idea that perhaps the actual definition is not the appropriate one, and that we must search for the right definition. That will be all. Thank you for your time.